Hello and welcome. My name is Al Barrows, and this is UFO-Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. Today, I'd like to relate something that I saw on the infographics show. It involves scientists connected to UFO-related projects that have been reported missing or have died under mysterious circumstances. John P. Wheeler III was practically born a perfect insider. He was born into a military family, graduated from West Point, and led troops at U.S. Nike Hercules missile base. He had law degrees from Harvard and Yale and worked as a systems analyst for the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And he was a junior staff officer at the Pentagon. It's safe to say his resume was stacked. But from 2004 to 2008, Wheeler worked directly alongside top defense leadership, advising on acquisition, logistics, and energy inside the Pentagon and the Air Force. All this allowed him to get a job at the MITRE Corporation, a federally funded organization working on aviation, defense systems, cybersecurity, and more, often behind the scenes of major government projects. If John Wheeler III wasn't the beating heart of the defense technology in the United States, he was undeniably one of the organs next to it. In 2010, he added yet another title to his collection, victim of a disturbing and mysterious murder. In late December of 2010, he had celebrated Christmas with his family before claiming that he needed to make a quick trip to D.C. for work before the new year. The next time anyone saw him, it wasn't in person. It was on grainy, disjointed CCTV footage. After that, he was never seen again. On the 29th, he was seen in CCTV footage outside of a parking lot appearing visibly distressed. Something was making him believe that he couldn't trust anyone. Maybe, to some extent, he was right. On December the 30th at 8 a.m., Wheeler staggered into a subway looking filthy and disheveled. He bought a coffee and left. He visited a law office not long after and appeared to make a concerted effort to hide his face from the security cameras. He attempted to get a ride to Philadelphia from a small business administration office. The last time he was ever seen was between 8 and 9 p.m. that night, wandering through downtown Wilmington and caught by pure chance on surveillance footage. His body was thrown into a commercial dumpster and wouldn't be found until it was emptied out with the garbage at the Cherry Island landfill in Wilmington. Hal Brown, deputy director for the medical examiner's office, claimed that the cause of death was non-penetrating blunt force trauma above the neck. The autopsy report also noted widespread bodily trauma. In other words, this wasn't a natural death and not something that could be easily explained away. So who could have done this and why? His watch and expensive class ring were still on his corpse when it was found. So robbery could be ruled out as a reasonable motive for the murder, unless he was being robbed of something priceless yet easy to miss. The knowledge locked away inside of his brain, forever lost if he were to meet an unfortunate fate. And just a few days before this incident transpired, he had sent an email to his friend, Richard Rodewald, where he expressed worries that he didn't think the U.S. was ready for cyber warfare threats to come. What made Wheeler so certain? Had Wheeler seen something he shouldn't have? Wheeler's family posted a $25,000 reward for any information that led to the solving of his murder, but nobody ever came forward. His wife, Catherine Kleiss, speculated in an interview with Slate magazine, "I think perhaps no one has been on the reward because they've already been paid. The way they disposed of the body, it's a miracle anybody ever found it." That just sounds like a pro to me, she said. And Thomas McNeary, a retired Air Force officer, said a similar thing. A man with that experience, it could have been foul play to get some of the secrets he had. Could the classified work Wheeler was involved in be connected to what happened to him? And this wasn't just an isolated case either. People who have worked closely with the government on technology projects, especially involving propulsion, are no strangers to experiencing particular and violent deaths, even when those deaths don't seem to line up with everything we know about them. This includes a list that began circulating online of 25 scientists that died over an 8-year span between 1982 and 1990, while connected in some way to the infamous Star Wars defense program. The case is known as the GEC Marconi Scientist Deaths Incident after the company they worked for. Dr. Keith Bowden, a senior computer scientist on the project, was the first. After a social function in London circa 1982, he drove home. His car lost control while crossing a bridge, careened down an embankment and into an abandoned rail yard. He was killed on impact. His wife and solicitor never bought the official line that it had been a drunk driving incident. It was so out of character for the normally sensible Dr. Bowden. In 1985, radar technician Roger Hill died with the help of his own shotgun. And ex-GEC worker Jonathan Walsh fell out of his hotel window. Incidentally, he had been confiding in friends and loved ones that he feared for his life for unknown reasons in the days leading up to his death, not unlike the lingering worries expressed by John Wheeler. And these mysterious deaths got even stranger. In 1986, a 24-year-old computer control system prodigy, Vimal Data Jib-I, fell to his death from a suspension bridge above the Avon River, falling 331 feet. It's easy to think this might be the tragic result of a genius pushed to the edge by pressure, except that it wouldn't explain the fact that his pants were pulled down around his ankles and he had a conspicuous needle injection wound in one of his buttocks. But somehow that feels pretty tame compared to the death of Ashad Sharif that same year. This satellite detection dish pioneer was acting incredibly strange in the days leading up to his death, but nothing could prepare anyone for what happened next. He tied a rope around his neck, looped it around the branch of a tree, and then tied the other end to the back of his car. At least, that's what the official report said. In 1987, two more researchers were killed in suspiciously similar circumstances, Richard Pugh and Mark Wisner, both of whom worked for the Ministry of Defense. Both were found with their feet bound and plastic bags forced over their heads, suffocating them. In both cases, months apart, the coroner declared that these incidents were the result of, quote, sexual misadventure. John Britton, David Scales, Trevor Knight, Peter People, and Andrew Hall, all scientists either involved in the MOD or Marconi, died of carbon monoxide poisoning in their homes during this period. An interesting oversight for men as professional and careful as them. The strange and violent deaths continued into the late 80s. In 87, David Sands drove his car into the front of an empty cafe at high speeds and burst into flames. There were 2 extra cans of gasoline in the car with him. Michael Baker, George Contis, and Stuart Gooding would also die in strange car crashes. David Greenhall, another defense contractor employee, leaped off a bridge the exact same day that Gooding died. He passed away a few days after the incident, but when awake in the hospital, he claimed that he had no idea what was going on. Both Alistair Beckham and John Ferry died of self-inflicted electrocution within the same month, and the only female scientist on the death list, Shauna Warren, experienced a particularly gruesome death in 1987. She was gagged, noosed, and drowned in shallow water, which investigators at the time declared self-inflicted. A serial offender was arrested for the crime over 30 years later in 2021, but given the insanity of everything happening around this event, it's hard to blame anyone for being skeptical about any of the official details here. These deaths seem to form an unsettling pattern of multiple scientists connected to defense and aerospace work dying under strange circumstances. When you put the 11 found bodies or the last known locations on a map of the United States, you immediately start to see some data clusters. These cases aren't random residue of population data. We're looking at three distinct kill zones where it seems to be extremely dangerous to be a high-ranking U.S. scientist. First, there's the so-called tech trail extending from Massachusetts to Alabama. Among the first in the pattern was Amy Eskridge, who died on June 11, 2022, from what authorities claimed was a self-inflicted gunshot wound in Huntsville, Alabama. And Jason Thomas was last seen in Wakefield, Massachusetts on December the 12th, 2025. His waterlogged corpse was found in a nearby lake in March 2026. 3 days after Jason Thomas disappeared on December the 15th, Nuno Lorello was found shot dead inside the foyer of his home in Brookline, Massachusetts, almost a 30-minute drive from where Thomas disappeared. But these are somehow the least concerning of the trends, especially when you see the other two data sets, the New Mexico cluster and the California cluster. In California, in shockingly close proximity to NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL, and Caltech, we have 4 more suspicious names to add to the list. Michael David Hicks was found dead in his own Sunland home on July the 30th, 2023. Frank Mywald died of unknown causes in Los Angeles on July the 4th, 2024. Monica Reza disappeared during a hike on Mount Waterman near Los Angeles on June the 22nd, 2025. And on February the 16th, 2026, Carl Grillmeyer was shot dead on his porch. That comes out to a prominent scientist in California found dead every year since 2023. This series of cases is known as the Aerospace Corridor, and in New Mexico, in what investigators are referring to as the Nuclear Corridor, things are looking just as grim. In May 2025, Anthony Chavez, a resident of Los Alamos, disappeared without a trace. A month later, in June, Melissa Casillas, also from Los Alamos, was last seen walking along State Road 518 in Talpa before vanishing. And after an uneventful July, this frightening phenomenon struck again in August when Stephen Garcia disappeared. He was last seen leaving his Albuquerque home with a loaded handgun, but left his phone and wallet at home. And on February the 27th, 2026, retired Major General William Neal McCasland left his home and never came back. At least 11 scientists have died or disappeared since 2022 in 3 hotspots across the United States. But that's just when you look at the broad strokes on a map. When you begin to dig into the details to truly understand the commonalities between the scientists at play here, it's almost impossible to avoid coming to the conclusion that something sketchy is going on. And much like the cluster of deaths in the 1980s, all of these researchers were involved in the aerospace or defense industry in some capacity. One was a former planetary scientist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, while another worked as an engineer on advanced Earth observation systems tied to NASA missions at the same institution. Others had spent years in technical or support roles linked to national laboratories such as Los Alamos and Kansas City National Security Campus, working in areas ranging from material science to logistics and infrastructure. And this pattern of deaths extends even into academia and high-end research. A plasma physicist leading work at MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center appears in the same broader network alongside a retired Caltech researcher known for contributions to studies of exoplanets and dark matter. Additional connections reach NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center and even into senior leadership within the Air Force Research Laboratory. They all fit a similar pattern to the disturbing spate of Marconi deaths decades before. But the most disturbing case of all is that of Amy Eskridge. The Huntsville self-proclaimed anti-gravity researcher. She was the founder and CEO of the Institute for Exotic Science, a research organization that focused on advanced propulsion, zero-point energy, and anti-gravity technologies. Towards the end of her life, Eskridge seemingly became extremely paranoid around her work and began to fear that she was being stalked by people with some kind of vested interest in what she was doing. This paranoia got so bad at a point that she hired an ex-British intelligence officer to keep an eye on her. But this would sadly prove to not be enough. She claimed to have experienced physical attacks like burns from some unknown kind of directed energy weapon and psychological attacks like harassment and constant surveillance. Eskridge was found home dead from a gunshot wound with a discarded firearm nearby. It seemed like a pretty open and shut case in its own incredibly tragic way. However, one of Eskridge's friends reported a message that she'd allegedly left him to release before her death, which read, quote, "If you see any report that I killed myself, I most definitely did not. If you see any report that I overdosed myself, I most definitely did not. If you see any report that I killed anyone else, I most definitely did not," end quote. So are the online conspiracy theories true? Were all those deaths related to a UFO cover-up? Or were they just all tragic coincidences? My name is Al Barrows. This has been UFO Disclosure. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.